we'll see over the next many months and even throughout the year. If you can think about what we've witnessed and these different groups, so Boogaloo Boys, some of these accelerationists who are trying to foment a second civil war, trying to race to bring this about, they're not going to go away. For them, it's about these big moments and being out there. You're showing pictures that are highly emblematic of that kind of thought. Then we have more organized groups, which are militia type groups, which have, been signaling that they should stand down right now because they see that there's a large military and law enforcement presence in the Capitol, but they're not going away either. They're talking about we need to take time, we need to wait. I think it's going to be a massive challenge for the new Biden administration to try and unify people, particularly if elected leaders continue to incite and foment this sort of chaos, if they continue to point. And we've been lucky in one sense during the pandemic, but there has not been large mass gatherings or targets. I expect that will change as the year goes on. And so when we think about domestic terrorism, I'd like to remind and jump people back to the 1990s when we were talking about Eric Rudolph, Timothy McVeigh, the Atlanta and Oklahoma City bombings. That's my big fear running through 2021.
And let me just stick with you for a second, because it's not like we didn't know white supremacy was a problem. A lot of these folks ascribe to the white supremacy ideology. It's not like the government hadn't issued warnings about this, where there's even reporting out this morning that they were intent on attacking Congress. So what would you say to current law enforcement agencies, particularly at the federal level, about taking these threats seriously, and any advice on how they can address these threats when it could be an individual or it could be the masses?
Tiffany, I would say, particularly, I watched the FBI over the last couple of years. You might remember there was a white supremacist shooting at a Walmart in El Paso about 18 months ago. The FBI has really picked it up, and I thought they've done an excellent job. And you saw them do many preemptive arrests of people affiliated with Boogaloo Boys and other threat groups headed into the election. But honestly, there's a capacity problem. There's just too many threats for them to track. We've seen it. How many arrests have they done? I've never seen a terrorism or extremism scenario where they've had to do this many cases this quickly. 2 weeks before that, we were talking about the Nashville bombing, which we still don't really understand why that occurred. And now they're having to do the inauguration. So I think at the federal level, they have learned this from all the way back to 9/11 to now, but it's a capacity issue because it's just growing out there in the public.
Yeah, growing like weeds across the country. I want to turn back to my attorneys general here. And Aaron, I'll kick it back to you first. I don't want to lose my amen corner here, but let me ask, how do you guys, as attorneys general of these states, make sure that you're prosecuting people who mean to incite violence, but also protect the legitimate rights of people who are just protesting? Because we should be clear about the clear line here. You've got Florida man, Governor Ron DeSantis, who's trying to institute laws that will disproportionately impact Black Lives Matter protesters. So how do we walk this fine line? Aaron, and what do you say?
Tiffany, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because the truth of the matter is, and if the proposition may not be as old as the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it doesn't take a Dead Sea scholar to be able to recognize that there's a difference between the First Amendment right to free speech and some of the stuff that we've seen people engage in who come in and engage in violence and vandalism. We have seen, you mentioned Boogaloo Boys a little earlier, that some folks come in to try to infiltrate and co-opt the message of peaceful protesters. BLM was a prime example where Boogaloo Boys came into Las Vegas intent on destroying federal and local buildings, and they got caught with Molotov cocktails, and they will be prosecuted. But you also have examples, I'm certain, of what we saw in D.C., where people who were there to engage in peaceful protests, stuff that I encourage, were co-opted as well by violent protesters or by violent rioters. But what I have said from the very beginning, whether it was the people dressed in militia attire on our state's capital, protesting our governor for instituting directives to save us, to protect us, that they have the right to peacefully do that, whether it was Black Lives Matter protesters protesting in favor of Black lives, or whether it was the people protesting in the Capitol against the election they didn't like. Do it peacefully, we have no issue. But if you violate the law, we will prosecute you.
That's good to know. Keith Ellison, I'll ask you the same question. How do you walk that fine line?
Well, I think it is important to send the message to people who attend a protest that if you see someone with a weapon, if you see someone with an incendiary device, if you see someone waving a violent white supremacist flag or putting out a violent message, walk away from that. Be clear. These people are trying to use you. They're using you to push forward violence. And you, who are there for a peaceful protest, no matter what your cause is, should back away from those folks and say, I didn't show up here for this. I would imagine that there's a fair number of people who showed up at the Capitol on January 6th who were told by the president that the election was stolen, but were only there to raise their voices. They got exploited, and the entire enterprise looked really bad when those violent folks used them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to punctuate again. There's a difference between people protesting to protect their lives and people protesting because they didn't get their way. That one was a riot.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.